day. Welcome back to our series of the Bible in 365 days, where we try to go through this King James version of the Bible daily based on its 1 year reading plan. And today, on the 2nd of March, we go through 1 Samuel chapter 21 verse 1 to chapter 26 verse 25. It is day 61, so it is quite a lot that we will be going through. But we start off by David finding himself in Nob, where he approaches a temple that has the priest Ahimelech inside it. And when he is there, he asks Ahimelech to provide him with anything that they might have, for he has been sent there by King Saul, and King Saul has said this privately, that he and several men go to different places so that they may see what is happening within the kingdom. And Ahimelech says, I don't really have much here except for the bread that we used within the temple. And this is sort of, you can see it as like some hallowed bread that they have, not the regular type of bread that people eat. And David says, you can give it unto me, for it is bread that the Lord has provided. And Ahimelech asked, have you guys at least stayed away from women? And David said, yes, over the past 3 days that we have been on our journey, we have stayed away from women. And David asks Ahimelech, are there any weapons that they might have around here? For David is not carrying any. And Ahimelech knows who David is. And he says, we do have the sword that you used to slay Goliath here with us. It is wrapped and it is being preserved, for you could see it as something that the people in Israel see as a token of where they are today and a reminder of the epic battle that David had with Goliath. And David asks if he could have Goliath's sword yet again. And Ahimelech gives it to him, and David and his men are on their way. And when they get to Gath, the people of Gath recognize that David is here, and in order to try and not create any sort of conflict, David pretends to be someone who has been driven mad, so that when the people of Gath tell the king that David is here, that David who slayed Goliath, a man who looks like him is here, and the king sees David, he says, surely this can't be David. Just look at this man. His drool is going down his beard. He's just scribbling stuff on the wall. Surely this isn't the David that killed Goliath. Why would you bring a madman to me? And in that way, David is able to go through Gath without any issues, without any conflict. And many people have been following David within his journey. He's not alone. And within the city where Saul is as well, a lot of people respect David for who he is and what he's done and all the valiant battle that he has fought for the king. David is someone who hasn't really crossed the king in any way, even though the king wants him dead. The people around Saul holds David in high regard. And Saul, at this point, he calls, or he hears that David was with the priests Ahimelech, and he calls Ahimelech and all the priests who are around him to come forth and tell him where David is. And they have no idea where David is, but Saul assumes that they are trying to hide David, and they are working with David to try and get him away from Saul. And when Saul tells the soldiers around him to kill the priests, they refuse to. Remember, the soldiers who are there hold David in high regard, and they do not want to kill the people who minister unto God as well. But there is one person who is willing to fight or do what Saul tells them, and that is Doeg the Edomite. And Doeg the Edomite ends up massacring all those of the house of Ahimelech. So they kill all the priests and all the family members except one person who ends up escaping, and that is Abitar. He is one of the sons of Ahimelech. But Abitar escapes, and he finds David, and he tells David everything that King Saul has done and everything that has happened to his family. And David, he feels some sense of responsibility for what has happened to Abitar's family, and he promises Abitar that he will be safe as long as he is around David. And now David is still on his journey to move away from Saul, and he goes to a place called Keilah, a city called Keilah. And within the city called Keilah, Saul hears that David is moving to this city in Keilah. Now, the reason for David's being in Keilah is that he heard the Philistines are attacking this city, and the Philistines are a huge or a well-renowned enemy of Israel. And David goes to Keilah to actually fight against the Philistines. But before he goes there, he speaks to God and says, if we go down to Keilah, will we be able to defeat the Philistines? And God answers and says, yes, you'll be able to. And that's why they go down. But Saul hears of David's being in Keilah and starts his search and heads out. But while in Keilah, David has an inkling that Saul will be on his way, and he speaks to God yet again. And God does indeed agree that yes, Saul is on his way. And David asks, will the people of Keilah give me up to Saul if he arrives? And God answers him, yes, they will give you up to Saul as soon as he asks and as soon as he arrives. So David and his men leave the city of Keilah, and Saul hears that David has escaped him yet again. Now, David's best friend, Jonathan, the son of Saul, goes and finds David in the wilderness. And basically, within this interaction, Jonathan concedes and says, I know that you will be the next king. And he makes a vow to David that once David becomes king, Jonathan will be by his side. He will not be an enemy of David, but he will be reliable and be someone that David can call upon at any time. And once this has happened, David goes back to the wilderness in Maon, but Saul follows David out to the wilderness. And within this search, Saul finds himself actually overtaking David because the God actually finds or makes a way in which Saul can be confused within his search. And instead of Saul being the one with the upper hand, now it is with David. And David has a chance to actually kill Saul. But David decides that he will spare Saul's life. And by doing so, he also tells Saul that I am sparing your life. I do not want to kill you because you were appointed king by God. And I do not want to lay my hand on someone who has been anointed by God. And Saul has some sort of feels some shame, feels some sorrow, because truthfully, throughout all this time, there's nothing that David has done to deserve everything that Saul has been doing to him, to deserve all the hate that Saul has been sending his way. So Saul does feel some sort of sadness. And unfortunately, during this time, the prophet Samuel, he also passes away. We see this in chapter 25, verse 1. It just tells us about the death of Samuel, and he was buried in Ramah. And David actually went down from the wilderness to Paran, and all of Israel was gathered around during the funeral of Samuel, and everyone lamented Samuel because of the great person that he was, the person being a priest, someone being a minister unto God, and someone who had shown the people how you should actually act, how you should be when it comes to following God. This is the same Samuel who had anointed Saul to be the king. And now Saul kind of moves away from the story just a little bit, and we have the story of David, a man named Nabal, and his wife Abigail. Now, while David was living out in the wilderness, he used to protect a lot of some sheep shearers within the area, and these sheep shearers worked for a man named Nabal. And now David told a few of the young men within his party to go down to Nabal and tell him about all that they have done, and if they could just get something as sort of a payment to help them out while they live in the wilderness. And Nabal asked him, "Who is this David you guys talk about? Who is this son of Jesse you guys talk about? Am I supposed to just give up everything that I'm supposed to give to my men just to give it to this David who I have never met in my life?" And Nabal is very mean in his delivery. He's very rude in how he talks to the servants of David, and he kind of just brushes them off and acts like David is nothing within the society, and David is someone who doesn't deserve to receive anything that he is asking for. And the men go back to David and tell him of this. And now some of the sheep shearers, or one of the sheep shearers, actually speaks to the wife of Nabal and tells her about everything that Nabal had said to the servants of David. And she is shocked about what she hears. And immediately she starts to package some things that she could offer to David to make sure that David is not angered by what her husband has done. And at that same time, the servants of David actually get to David and tell him of everything. And David tells his entire party, which is about 600 men, to pick up their swords. And David picks up his sword as well, and they will head down to meet Nabal. So you can see on the side of David, some conflict might happen between David and Nabal. But fortunately for Nabal, his wife intercepts David and his party on their way, and she calms David down and explains to David that her husband is quite this crude man. He does not know how to speak to people, but if she was there, she would have accepted what the servants of David had asked for. And to bring peace between David's party and her home, she brings all these offerings that she has brought on her donkeys. And David is relaxed and is calmed by the words that come from the wife of Nabal, and he accepts and turns back with his party. So no conflict comes to Nabal and his family. And now Nabal, during this time, he starts to celebrate with his family. Everyone is merry and they're drinking. So his wife doesn't tell him anything that had happened. But the next day, when everything had subsided, she does tell Nabal what had happened, and he sort of has like a heart attack, and he stops moving, but he's still alive, but he stops moving, and after several days, Nabal did pass away. He died. And hearing of Nabal's death, David says it is better that Nabal dies by the hand of God than his hand himself. He's kind of happy that he didn't have to go and hurt Nabal, and he sent out his servants to go and find Abigail because he wanted to marry Abigail. And in hearing the news, Abigail agrees to go and meet David, and she takes some of her maid servants as well. But before she heads out, she washes the feet of all those who came to fetch her, and they head out to David. And now David does end up marrying Abigail, but he also marries other women as well who came with Abigail. So he also married Ahinoam and Jezreel. So he ended up with 3 wives. But you ask, what happened to Saul's daughter, Michal, who Saul had given to David to marry? Well, Saul had given Michal to another man after he had driven David away, a man called Phalti, the son of Laish, who was in Galim. That's who Michal was given to marry once Saul had moved David away. And now we go into the final pursuit of King Saul of David. Now, King Saul, you would think at this point he is sick of trying to kill David, but yet again he's in pursuit, and he finds where David is, and he and his men go out and they camp. But at night, David and a few of his men, they actually go out to the campsite where Saul is, for God had placed the entire camp that Saul was in under deep slumber. So when David and his men approached, no one heard, no one awoke, no one heard what they were saying. And David and a man named Abner find Saul, and now at this point it would have been a great time to actually kill Saul. And one of David's servants says, if you don't want to do it, just let me kill Saul. I have a spear. Let me put it through his heart so this whole thing can end. This whole running around can come to an end. But David again says, we cannot kill someone who has been anointed by God. We should not be the ones to kill Saul. If Saul is to die, it should be by the hand of God, or it should be when he is out in battle. It cannot be by us. So what they do is they take Saul's spear and some of his belongings and leave, and nobody wakes up. And David stands on one side and he starts to yell at Saul. He starts to cry for Saul, and one of his servants like, are you really now just crying at the king? We had a chance to kill this man, and why should you actually just call out his name? And David says, I'm giving him the respect that he deserves. And Saul does hear the voice of David, and he says, could this be the voice of my son David? Could this be the voice of the son of Jesse? And again, David shows Saul that I had the chance to kill you again within these pursuits that you have been making. And yet again, God had delivered you to my hand, and I refused to take your life away. I refused to stretch out my hand and kill you. And Saul finally acknowledges his sin. Saul finally admits that his chase or pursuit for David is not because David had done him wrong. It is all his fault. It all falls on top of Saul. Saul has been someone who has been trying to keep the title of king to himself, that he had forgotten who had given him the title of king. He had forgotten that he is here because of God, and throughout everything that he has done, all of his actions had not been for God while he was king. All of Saul's actions were to please Saul and not to please God. And that is where we will end it for today. It was longer than our usual videos, but we had a lot to go through, and there were parts that we shouldn't skip because they were all important. They all have some importance within the story of David and Saul. Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you now and forever. Thank you so much for watching this video.